A lot of good stuff to see out there for a dog.
Yeah. Open space.
Yeah.
All right, why don't I go ahead and do the introduction? I know people are still trickling in. But hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth webinar in our series for Language Adventure Pros. We are super excited and super grateful that we have Albert Coffey here with us. My Albert Coffey's tour of the pyramids here at La Cañada. The Virgen was one of the first activities I did when I moved to San Miguel, and I just loved his tour, and as so many people have. And Albert Coffey is an archaeologist and federally licensed tour guide. Participated in excavation and ethnographical studies in the area near and around San Miguel de Allende. His passion is sharing what he's learned through tours that he's given at the archaeological site and other sites in the state of Guanajuato and throughout Mexico. And today, a part of the proceeds will go to helping further research, rescuing legends and wisdom of the elders of the nearby rural indigenous communities, and to provide aid and to transport and support staff who had also been out of work due to the COVID-19 contingency. And so welcome everybody. If you haven't already sent in your donation, you can do that at our website, and we'll put that in the chat. But welcome everybody, thank you all for coming, and we're gonna hand it over to Albert Coffey.
Hello. Thank you everyone for coming. Can you hear me okay? I'll take that as a yes. Okay, I just want everyone to know, I probably met some of you before. I'm sure that some of you have probably been on my tour before, or maybe participated in one or two of the courses that I've given at the Instituto Allende, for the lifelong learning program. If that is the case, please bear with me. You'll have a little bit of repetition here, especially when it comes to some of the jokes. I've been trying to freshen up my material, but on that note, I'm really happy that all of you have joined me. I can't believe this many people would be interested in hearing what I have to say. Of course, tour guides like myself here in San Miguel are completely out of work. I have not worked or given a tour since the first week of March, maybe the second. All came as quite a shock because I was as busy as I've ever been, busiest month of the year, one day, next day, nothing, and it's been traumatic, but I know some good will come of this. And this is the reason I'm telling you this is because this is the first Zoom broadcast webinar that I have ever done myself. I have been on Zoom before 2 or 3 times as a listener, but this is my first time dealing with a new technology, which I know is going to be more prevalent in the future. So it's good for me to learn. Hopefully you will learn something for what I tell you today. Now, the first reason that I am a guide at the archaeological site, Cañada de la Virgen, and other sites in the state is because I'm an archaeologist. Now, I do not have a PhD. I was not an official member of the National Institute of Anthropology and History team who did the excavation at the site, but I was lucky. I was invited by Gabriela Cepeda, who was the director of the program, the project, to, as a volunteer, participate in the excavation for a short time in 2004. I mainly learned from the archaeologists who worked on the site, did a little bit of lab work there too, but my expertise, my educational background comes from anthropology degrees at Louisiana State University. I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and that is why I live in San Miguel now. Sorry to the Baton Rouge people out there. I still miss the people and a lot of the food, but at Louisiana State University, when you study anthropology in the United States, your coursework is usually based on the background and expertise of your professors. And it just so happens that at Louisiana State University, the professors there are what we call Mesoamericanists. A lot of them work in this part of the world that we call Mesoamerica. I'm going to talk about that and where we are in relation and the context of Mesoamerica using some maps and whatnot. But that was my background. That was my coursework in college. So after working in commercial architecture, and by the way, I'm going to stop talking about myself in just a minute or two here, don't worry. But I did some archaeological work in commercial archaeology, doing surveys and excavations and what's called cultural resource management. Really the only way for an archaeologist to make a living in the US is to be a college professor or go into that commercial side of it, which is cultural resource management, working for private companies in the paths of highways, pipelines, bombing ranges. It's called rescue archaeology. And I did that for several years, discovering sites and protecting them before they were destroyed by development. But my main objective at a certain point was to immerse myself in what I mainly studied. So about, 15, 16 years ago, I planned a journey through Latin America to immerse myself in what I mainly studied. My plan was to start in Guatemala, the heart of the Mayan area I'd studied the most about. And then move from different parts of Latin America, immersing myself and visiting different sites I'd only read about. But my plan was foiled, and I got a call from my cousin who was living here and going to the art school at the Instituto Allende. He convinced me to start my journey here and gave me this long list of all the things that make this a beautiful place to visit and live. I was reluctant to come here though, because I consider this part of Mexico of little importance archaeologically. Purely hunters and gatherers, no monuments, no pyramids, nothing monumental built by pre-Hispanic people. Too far north to be part of that realm we call Mesoamerica, but I came anyway. On that first day, when I got here, I met my cousin's girlfriend, a local woman who told me if I was an archaeologist, I might be interested in checking out this presentation that was being given at a hotel around the corner from where we were staying. And that the archaeologists from the National Institute of Anthropology and History would be giving a presentation about the pyramids outside of town. They were about to start excavating. So I went to that presentation and I met Gabriela Cepeda, the lead archaeologist, and members of her team. And I convinced her I would be willing to do anything necessary to become part of it. And the rest of that is history. So that's the reason I am a guide at the site and giving this presentation. So hopefully what I can do is share with you what I've learned through my background in college and from my life living here and participating in this. So here we go. Now, okay, let's see here. Part one. Now, what is Mesoamerica? Where is San Miguel Allende in the context of Mesoamerica? To start this off, I want to let you know that this first session today, I'll present my information for an hour. At the hour mark, I will turn this over to a question and answer session. So feel free if you want to send a question through the chat, that's okay. At the very end though, we will go to questions and answers. So if you want to write down your question and save it for the end, that would be easiest. And I'll keep moving along. I've got a lot of information to give you in a short amount of time. So I'm going to move at a steady pace, and just please let me know if I'm going. I've had a comment in the past, sometimes I talk too fast. It might be because I get excited about the material, a little bit overzealous. So let me know if that happens and I will slow it down, no problem. But to address what is Mesoamerica and where we are, I think the best thing to do is to go back to the very beginning. Now, when I say the beginning, I mean early hunters. Now, the first people to occupy this hemisphere came from Asia, hunting megafauna. Megafauna includes, can you see that red dot? Mammoth, mastodon, giant sloth, giant buffalo, prehistoric horse, goat, camelids, saber-toothed cats, bear, mammals, okay? These big game hunters crossed the most widely accepted theory for how these early migrants got to this hemisphere is over Bering Land Bridge. okay? Now, the Bering Land Bridge at the end of the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, during the Pleistocene and the Ice Age, a lot of the water in the oceans were sucked up into the ice and exposed this landmass that connected Asia to North America. These big game used that as a bridge to cross over, and humans followed them. All indigenous people in this hemisphere genetically are Asian. They can genetically be traced back to a few patrilineal groups that crossed over from Asia at the end of the Ice Age. And they came, and I believe the new theories, they came in about 2 or 3 different waves of migration, and very quickly migrated all the way down to the tip of South America. As you see in this image, the red line depicts land migration. That's the most widely accepted theory. Another theory is that there was some sort, or maybe a combination of land travel and oceanic crossing, oceanic coastal migration, which you can see there in the blue line. Now, another possible, or a theory about a possible transoceanic crossing, you can see here. This is not feasible to me. This is on the fringes of thought when it comes to the first settlers to the hemisphere. If there was any type of transoceanic crossing, there is a big ocean current that goes across to South America that could have accidentally swept people away on a raft or whatnot. I don't find that feasible, but I'm going to throw that out there, let you think about it. A few archaeological sites down in South America that were discovered and dated go back to, they say, before the Bering Land Bridge was available, but they're always arguing about how those samples were taken, whether the instruments were calibrated properly. So let's just stick for now with the Bering Land Bridge crossing. Now, these big game hunters took advantage of the swampy areas. Now, back then the climate was wetter and cooler. They would herd these animals. This image you see of the mammoth there being hunted is an exhibit at the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, and it shows how they herded these animals into a bog, a swampy area, got them stuck in the mud to make an easy kill, and it was feast and famine. They would feast for days, weeks, months on dried meat, and then it was off to hunt again. Some of the theories about early human sacrifice are that the first forms of human sacrifice, which is an important element and aspect of Mesoamerican culture I'll be addressing, go back to the early hunters and gatherers who committed infanticide because they had to stay highly mobile to follow these big animals they hunted. So if they had too many children, offspring, babies, they were held back, and that didn't help them much. So they committed infanticide to keep moving. The other photographs you see here are very recent. This is a new discovery just near Mexico City at an airport where they discovered, I think it was around 60 mammoth skeletons, I believe maybe even a few native people. And it's going to help shed light and further open up our understanding of how these people lived and hunted. Now, on that note, and when we talk about San Miguel de Allende in particular, I was lucky because I think it was about 8 years ago, and people call me from time to time because they know I'm an archaeologist and they know I do not work for the government. And they will call me and they'll say, Albert, I've got this collection of artifacts in my house and I'm afraid to tell anyone because I don't want to be arrested for it. I've been given these things. They'll say, can you come and see if they're authentic? Just don't tell anybody about it. And I'll go to their house and I'll check it out, and I will give them my opinion or call someone else I know who may know better and figure it out for them. You can, if you do have artifacts and a collection in your possession now in Mexico, if you do report it to the government, there's some paperwork that you can fill out, and they'll record it. They would consign you as a guardian to watch over it. So they're trying to persuade people to at least report what they have so they can record it. But this guy called me, living about 20 minutes north of town, and he said, Albert, I heard you're an archaeologist and you don't work for the government. He said, that's perfect because I think I found a dinosaur. And I'm digging a septic pit about 10 feet down next to my house. I found these really big bones and teeth. The only explanation is that it's a dinosaur. And he said, I was wondering if you or someone you know would like to buy the bones from me. And I said, well, if you sell the bones or whatever it is you discovered, I don't think it's a dinosaur, but they have discovered megafauna in the area north of San Miguel, basically a big paleontology reserve in and of itself. I said, if you sell it, you could go to prison. It's illegal. He said, well, I don't mean sell it, but maybe set up a museum and charge people money to look at it. And I said, well, I don't think so. I said, leave everything where it is. Don't touch anything. And I went to Gabriela Cepeda, told her about it. We went back out to his house. She brought along a fellow archaeologist, and we extracted a few bones, I think a tooth maybe, and sent them out to Mexico City. And I believe what she told me was that it was identified as a 50,000-year-old mastodon. There is no paleontology department in the state yet, and I believe that INA, the National Institute of Anthropology and History, oversees finds like that, but because of a lack of resources and whatnot, we never fully excavated, but it was recorded and protected. So that's my little story about megafauna in San Miguel. And we'll move on from there. Now this is an interesting piece, speaking of megafauna and early hunters. And this goes back to 15 to 20,000 years ago, the end of the Ice Age, up until about 10,000 years ago, when these big mammals were hunted. Well, the two theories about the disappearance, which is what they call a mass extinction, quaternary mass extinction of large mammals. Around that time period, the climate started to become more arid. These large grasslands faded where the big animals grazed. And the other theory is that if they were overhunted. The latter theory about human overhunting is probably more feasible. And sadly, this type of thing we know is still happening today. Humans' impact on the environment is profound. And I think that right now, as you all may probably understand, we're feeling the repercussions and consequences of that action. This is the hip bone of an extinct camelid, carved into the shape of what seems to be a pig's face. And if that is the case, and it is, this is a piece of art, some of the earliest art discovered on this continent. And art during this early hunters' time period was naturalistic. It was art for the sake of art, mostly representations of the fauna they hunted, hunting scenes, migrations. This was found in Mexico State. The name of the place, let me see here. Got it right here. It's hard for me to pronounce, but it's Tequixquiac in the state of Hidalgo, it's north of Mexico City. If this face that you're looking at is actually probably the peccary or the wild pig, someone called tapir, jabalí, great source of protein. Some of the earliest forms of art also represented here in the Baja California area. Again, naturalistic scenes of the fauna they hunted. The hands that you see on this rock shelter wall are what they call positive and negative paint, using organic materials, iron oxide for the red, yellow, and black, which were the three colors used in this type of rock art, blown from the mouth over the hand to create that print, sometimes printed directly with the hand. This can be seen all the way up into the later Mayan period. In some of the archaeological sites in the Yucatan, you'll see these negative and positive handprints. Negative handprints relate to the underworld and positive to our earthly realm. Okay, this is the earliest art you'll have on the continent. Now these rock paintings like this and their style go all the way back over to France and Spain. They go all the way up into the northwestern part of the US, a very similar theme. Here's a little bit more of that. Some of these taken at the bottom here. You can see we've got these long deer-like creatures, probably is depicting some sort of a mass feast or hunt or migration. A little bit more there. Always white, yellow, red, and black seem to be the colors used for this early rock art. You got a little bit of, so a few geometric patterns there, possible shamanistic behavior depicted, more animal painting. And then as these people got down into Mexico, and here's the topographical map of Mexico, you'll see that it's a very, very biodiverse. Mexico is the 5th most biodiverse country in the world. You've got highlands in the center, lowlands on the coast. This area down here, all of the Yucatan Peninsula, one of the most recent geographical aspects to have arisen in this part of the world. It's a limestone shelf. This is all lowlands, jungle, rainforest down in Central America. This is all part of Mesoamerica, by the way. Mesoamerica includes all of Mexico to the south of us. Here we are. This is Leon. San Miguel is in this area. You'll notice where my dot is. Here in San Miguel de Allende, and in particular the cubilete, or the statue of Jesus on the mountain overlooking the airport in Leon, Guanajuato state, is the geographical center of Mexico. Now, geographers have a mathematical way of determining what is the geographical center of a country, and we are in the very geographical center, central plateau, Altiplano Central, however you want to call it. 63,000 feet above sea level. Archaeological site, Cañada de la Virgen nearby at about 7,000 feet. Volcano near town. We're on the trans-Mexican volcanic axis, which runs right through central Mexico into Central America. One of the most active seismic zones in the world. This part of it has been inactive for a long time. But just near San Miguel, just south of San Miguel, is the Palo Huérfano volcano that most local people refer to as Los Picachos. When we get further along into the next session, I'm going to show you some images of this. But this we're at the convergence of 3 different tectonic plates. The northernmost volcanic field in all of Mexico to the north of us. Arid, true desert, not good for extensive agriculture, and that's why the limits of Mesoamerica go from like this, right around here, dip down to us, and then back up again. So we're on the northern frontier of the realm that we call Mesoamerica. All of Mexico to the south, the Yucatan Peninsula, Chiapas, which is this southernmost state in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, the western parts of El Salvador and Honduras, that is. That's the eastern southernmost limit. That's Mesoamerica. Now, geographically, you've got Sierra Madre, eastern Sierra Madre, this long chain of mountains on the east. You've got the western Sierra Madre, this long chain of mountains on the west that run right up into the Rockies. They meet together in the southern Sierra Madre, which is Oaxaca, the southernmost bulge and the southernmost, well, one of the southernmost states in Mexico, bordering Chiapas over here, the most mountainous part of the country. I lived there for 3 years, and I can tell you there is a very unique link between the ancient people who built sites in and around San Miguel to the people of Oaxaca, through art, architecture, burial practices, astronomical alignments of the buildings, and language. That we'll be getting into. But there we are. That's where we're located. To make this a little bit more clear for you, I've got several other maps. Better move along a little bit faster here. I could have you guys here for days, so I'm going to try to condense a lot of information here in the time we have. So let's move along. Next map. This comes from the FAMSI website, the Foundation for the Advancement of Mesoamerican Studies Institute. Great website, much information about Mesoamerica, and many different scholars contribute to it. This comes from probably back in the late 90s, early 2000s. You'll notice different regions: Western, Central, Mexico City, Veracruz. All the green is Mayan area. Oaxaca down here. But you notice where we are, where my red dot is, that's where we are. There's no designation. They might call this Northwest area, Northern area, but back when this map was made, this part of Mexico was not even considered part of Mesoamerica. Just like myself, Mexican archaeologists, geographers consider this part of Mexico too far north to be part of Mesoamerica. I remember them telling me that when it was first, the site here near San Miguel was first reported to the government, it took a long time for them to convince the government to come down and investigate, because like myself and others, they said, there's no way, there are no pyramids there, it's too far north. They've had to actually rethink the map of Mesoamerica, push those northern limits further north to include this area very recently, based on discoveries like what I'm going to be talking to you about. Another map shows different regions: Mayan, Oaxacan, Guerrero is a state. I'm not sure why they really put that one there. Central. So we're what they call Northern Central Mesoamerica, newly designated area, but very integral now, considered an integral part of the realm that we call Mesoamerica, and has opened up San Miguel, Guanajuato area to archaeological tourism. The only state in the country that combines federal and state resources to open archaeological sites and support them is Guanajuato. This could be something that is followed in the future by other states. And to move right along, here's the language map, a mosaic of indigenous languages. 62 ethnic groups, 68 languages spoken, different language families, language groups. Now, throughout the millennia, these language groups, they broke apart from each other, stemming from a mother tongue. The people migrated, they moved around a lot, north, south, east, west. So you'll have a language spoken over here where we are in the central part of Mexico, another language more similar to it than anything around it, spoken all the way down in places like El Salvador. And the one spoken in this area, the most widely spoken indigenous language in this area, is Otomi, the third most widely spoken of the 68 languages spoken. First being Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs; Maya, second, with many dialects and branches. Otomi, 4 different dialects. The one spoken here is Ñañu. The people would prefer to be called Ñañu rather than Otomi. The word Otomi is taken on, in some cases, a relatively negative connotation for reasons I'll be explaining towards the end of the course. The Uto-Aztecan language family or group, it reaches all the way up into Oregon and down here into Mexico, originating here, of course. Otomi, as well as Zapotec and Mixtec, spoken down in Oaxaca, part of the same group, Otomangue. That's the linguistic connection to Oaxaca that I'll be getting in more detail about when we get into the second session. This first session, by the way, this first class, an hour, is I'm going to be giving you an introduction to Mesoamerica, its characteristics, what makes it unique, and some of the history leading up through different time periods, so that we get a feeling for where San Miguel falls into that context. So that's my plan for the first class. The second class is going to be focused more on this particular area and the archaeological sites discovered in this area, and especially Cañada de la Virgen, the one that I take people to almost every day, or used to take people to every day. Now, this is kind of strange for me doing the Zoom webinar because I'm used to having 10 to 20 people around me for about 4 or 5 hours giving the tour. So I can't see how you're reacting. I hope you enjoy it. One person who I think is with us right now is Dr. Rosana Quiroz. Now, Dr. Rosana Quiroz is the archaeoastronomer who did a decades-long study at the site, with whom I've been working for several years, bringing people to her restaurant, Lunativa, which is where she focuses on indigenous food and gives a great presentation of her astronomical work. She's the real expert on this. So as we go and towards the end, Rosanna, if you're out there, I may ask you a question, I may ask for your input, especially during the second portion. So here we are, Guanajuato, central part of Mexico. This comes from the book that Gabriela Cepeda wrote. I'm going to use some images from it. Cañada de la Virgen, Refugio de los Muertos o los Ancestros. And now, early settlers. Now, once the megafauna died out and the climate became more arid, people switched over to hunting smaller game, and the advent of agriculture came about. Now, this was always mixed with a level of hunting and gathering. But agriculture and its importance cannot be overstated, because with agriculture comes the extra stored food that is necessary to support large populations and the rise of advanced civilization. When you have extra stored food through agriculture, you have free time. You don't have to focus all of your energy on hunting and gathering, and you have time to specialize in things like leadership, art, religion, astronomy, architecture, writing, building, farming, all the way down to slave, different levels of a stratified society. And the first domesticated plant and the history of this hemisphere, and this leads up to about 2000 BC, when people first started settling down, planting crops extensively and building monuments, which we call the pre-classic period. We'll be getting into that shortly. But the first domesticated plant was the bottle gourd. May have come from the old world, may have washed up on a beach somewhere. Someone was walking down the beach, they found one of these things, dried, decided to use it to store food or water. Not edible. The inside of the plant is not edible, but this is the first domesticated plant in the hemisphere, the bottle gourd. Comes in many different varieties, decorated, and you'll find these in the island areas, the Caribbean, all over, but probably originated actually in the old world. And then, the most important of all, and what civilized life, let's rephrase that, advanced civilization in Mexico based upon what I'm about to tell you. Food crops and other crops native to Mexico, both wild and domestic, that changed the diet dramatically throughout the world. What you see in this image here, metate and mano, grinding stones for grinding, the most important of all those plants, corn. Now, one of the traits that make Mesoamerica unique is the diet. Of course, we know that, Mexican food, of course, my favorite. Nothing like it in the world, considering, I think it is that UNESCO is considering making it intangible World Heritage Property so they can further the funding for research into the culinary arts. It may already be, actually. But corn, beans, and squash, they grow in a symbiotic relationship. Beans fix nitrogen, which helps the corn grow. The beans grow up the corn stalk, and they both provide just enough shade for the squash growing beneath them. When you eat them together, they form a complete protein similar to the combination of beans and rice. And if you throw chili peppers into that mix, another native staple crop in Mexico, which helps to break down and fix protein in the body, all that together, the basis for a really good diet. But it goes much further than that. But before we talk about the others, we have to stress again the importance of corn. Now, advanced civilization and stratified society, monument buildings, pyramids, would never have been developed or built if someone, thousands of years ago, probably around between 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, maybe 5, had not invented the process that we call nixtamal. This is what the word tamal, or as we love to do in the US, corrupt the Spanish language, tamale, which is ridiculous when you're a Spanish speaker when you hear that. But the nixtamal process is what led to the support of large populations and the rise of advanced civilization in Mexico. Because when you have dried, stored corn, and you crush it up using your mano and your metate, and you mix it up to make tortillas, you have no access to the niacin, the B3, I think it is, vitamin. You have no access to the niacin. So if you don't soak it in water mixed with lime, and not the fruit lime, the mineral, calabiba, or which back then came from ash. If you don't soak the corn in lime water first, you have no access to the niacin. So when they started exporting corn to places like Africa, the US, and other parts of the world, where people became highly dependent upon corn, they developed an epidemic known as Pellagra, which is a niacin deficiency, because they didn't understand that process. It has a lot to do with skin disorders and eventually death. They didn't understand that process. So how did they figure that out thousands of years ago? That process, medicinal plant knowledge, astronomy, architecture, mathematics, all of this taken together tells us these people were reaching a very high level of intelligence, tapping into different regions of the brains we may not use as much today, using more of the brain's capacity, perhaps, but genius. Different varieties of corn, 59 different varieties of corn. In Mexico, I believe in the US, there are only 10 that are in use, mostly native here. Pod corn, popcorn, wild varieties, and all stemming or related to a form of wild corn we call teosinte, which still grows in rainforest areas and the jungle areas. A mixing of teosinte and a hybridization of different types of corn led to the corn we see today and its different varieties. You could accredit women with the rise of advanced civilization and, well, of course, advanced civilization in Mexico, because while the men were out hunting, they were at home experimenting with different types of corn until they got the best variety. So the domestication of corn, the basis for advanced civilization in Mexico, and their myth about the origins of humans are that after several different trial and error periods, the gods settled on corn dough and that humans were actually made of it, and they emulated that through physical alteration, ceremony, and religion, corn god being one of their most central deities. Beans in different varieties, mainly the pinto beans. We see here a milpa, where they grow the corn beans squashed together, amaranth, tomato, other crops as well. Great source of protein, of course. The squash, myriad varieties, many different varieties. The four most common varieties in ancient Mesoamerica, the warty, the crookneck, the pumpkin, and walnut. Like a rainbow of colors. Tomato. Now, tomato is indigenous to Mexico. When they first started exporting tomatoes to Italy, people there believed they were poisonous, part of the nightshade family, and wouldn't buy them. So a tomato merchant in a small town in Italy had a great marketing plan. He planted a tomato garden in the middle of town and put up guards around it. And people started to think, wait, that might be pretty important. So they started to buy it. And can you imagine Italy without tomatoes? Can you imagine Ireland without potatoes? The whole world without chewing gum, tobacco, chocolate, and vanilla, which all come from Mesoamerica, which make Mesoamerica one of the most important of the culture hearts in terms of food production. Potato, also independently domesticated in South America. Manioc, root crop, very important in southern lowland areas. Papaya, avocado, amaranth, chia, chili peppers, 150 varieties at least. Chiefly for making chewing gum, peanuts, cashews, jicama, guava, chocolate and vanilla. Chocolate, the way we see it today, sugar and milk came with the Europeans. Cacao, a frothy beverage used in ceremony, especially by the Maya on the Soconusco coast of Guatemala. Vanilla, Veracruz. Chicle, rubber. Tobacco, cotton. My very favorite, the Agave Cactus. I think we all know why, and this is why. Tequila and mezcal. Mezcal, believed to be of European innovation, actually it's now been determined of pre-Hispanic origin. Maguey is what pulque comes from. Medicinal, aguamiel. And the nopal, you could say the most important of all, and part of the symbolism that makes Mexico what it is, even included in the national seal and the flag. I became a Mexican citizen about 2 years ago, very happy about that, because now they cannot kick me out of the country out of revenge. I'm here to stay. I had to learn about a lot of this stuff on the fly, but the nopal cactus, part of the Apuntia family, 80 different varieties, 17 of which grow in this area around San Miguel. The fruit, the tuna, coconosle, flavorful, nutritious, great against the paddle itself, great against diabetes, cholesterol, many medicinal properties, and the juice from the cactus mixed with mud, sand, and lime and heated is what they used to create the mortar to build the monuments and the pyramids. in this area. So you could say that the nopal is the most important plant in the area. I think you'd be right if you said that. Copal incense, native. Copal smoke created what's called the vision serpent, the sweat bath for purification, bloodletting, and the incense created what's called the vision serpent, these enhanced visions of the serpent in the plume of smoke rising, its mouth opening, and the ancestor with whom they were communicating emerging from the mouth of the serpent, a ceremonial plant. Other ceremonial plants, peyote and psilocybin, magic mushroom, used in ceremony by the Huichol who cross over Mexico from the west coast to collect their peyote. Mushroom spores from magic mushroom discovered in the floors of the rooms where some of the priests lived at Cañada de la Virgen, and I'll get into more detail about their use. Experimentation, anthropologists do experiment with these types of things. I will leave it at that. Black obsidian and green obsidian. We're going to talk about the classic period and the great metropolis of Teotihuacan, just outside of Mexico City, the unifying force in all of Mesoamerica during what we call the classic period. Power, the power of that city maintained by the control of obsidian, mostly in the Sierra de Navajas and Pachuca in Mexico City. Green obsidian, the most valuable, any green stone considered living, and sent as an offering with a burial to assure eternal life. But the sharpest naturally occurring substance on earth, sharper than surgical steel, great for making cutting tools, arrowheads, and sacrificial knives. And yes, human and animal sacrifice, important theme as we move into characteristics that make Mesoamerica a unique culture hearth. A culture hearth is a focal point from which elements of culture spread outward based upon the domestication of certain plants and the rise of agriculture. We just mentioned how important that was. Now, 7 major culture hearths: Mesoamerica, Peru, Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley in Egypt, the Indus and Ganges valleys in India, the Yellow River Valley in China, and some include a more vague area known as West Africa. What makes Mesoamerica unique? Here we go. Human and animal sacrifice, heart extraction, beheading, disembowelment, animal attack, different varieties, what we call reciprocal sacrifice, done mostly male war captives, but considered necessary to keep the cycles of the cosmos in motion and the processes of nature functioning, intimate link to nature and her processes through bloodletting and human sacrifice. I did mention possible origins for that, going back to the big game hunters and infanticide, and possible ceremonialized version of population control, a new theory. Bloodletting, these are some Mayan art from Yaxchilan on the Usumacinta River that borders Guatemala. Bloodletting using cactus spine, stingray spine, sharpened bone, obsidian for cutting. This is an image of a priestess or queen running thorn-studded cord through her tongue. This is also done by the priest through the penis. This is very graphic, I know, but this unique intimate connection and leadership by example, by the way, by these rulers, help them maintain control and connect themselves to the other world. We'll get into more detail. Pyramid building in the form of the stepped pyramid, not the smooth-sided pyramids you'll see in Egypt. And Egypt, by the way, and Peru, the 2 most similar culture hearts of this one. Peru, the only one we know had a direct physical connection to through trade. Peruvian sea traders made their way up the west coast of Mexico, introduced the working of copper and pottery styles, and possibly certain elements of the architecture to the Tarascans of Michoacan to the southwest of us. This is the Pyramid of the Niches at Tajín in Veracruz. 365 niches, one for each day of the year. Inside of those were idols stolen long ago by looters. The most recognizable pyramid in Mexico, probably the Castillo, or the castle, Chichen Itza, stepped pyramid, radial pyramid with 4 staircases, one on each of the 4 sides, one just like this in Querétaro called El Cerrito or Pueblito, just about 45 minutes away from San Miguel, Toltec. I'll talk about that later. Talud tablero, slanted wall, vertical. This is something that comes straight from Teotihuacan, the big metropolis I mentioned we'll be talking about. I'll explain that in much more detail. The stepped pyramid painted. You have a rubble fill, stone outer covering, stuccoed and painted, elaborate art. We'll be addressing that for sure. Unique and complex calendar system. Now, this is what they call one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in all of the world in ancient times. Now, this is the Aztec Sunstone. The actual physical version of this is on display at the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, but it's not a calendar. It's actually a piece of art that represents different calendrical elements, 4 ages, each ending in a different calamity, the Aztec vision of time. We're in the 5th age. This one's supposed to end in earthquakes, or maybe it was 4th. But anyway, these are different elements of the calendar. These are day symbols, 20 day symbols: eagle, jaguar, flint, movement, wind, reed, ocelot, death. These are all combined in different ways. And as you can see here, this kind of just explains the different elements of that sunstone. In the center, Tonatiuh, the sun god, also related to the earth, obsidian, flint, tongue, always representing the god of the sun, and the calendar itself. This is a Mayan version using Mayan art of 2 calendars in one. What you have is a bar and dot combination for a number. A bar is 5, a dot is 1. So the numbers 1 through 13 matched with those 20 day symbols I mentioned. Okay, 13 times 20 is 260, the length of the ritual calendar in Mesoamerica, based on the time it takes for human gestation, the time between zenith passages of the sun over southern Mexico, all this numerology, all these calendrics based on natural processes. On the outside of that, you've got the numbers 1 through 18 matched with 20 day symbols. You mesh these 2 together as they turn around, matching up numbers and symbols, and they get around to the same spot, and the same combination repeats itself every 52 years. 52-year complete cycle in the Mesoamerican calendar. Now remember the numbers 13, 20, and 52. Write them down, because later, towards the end of this, all of this, I'm going to tell you about how it's been discovered recently by Rosana Quiros, the way those 3 numbers are incorporated into the way that the main pyramid at Cañada relates to the setting sun. An important part of her doctoral thesis that I'm sure we should all read. We can get that in English for you, we hope one day. Extremely interesting. And this one on the left, you see, taken by Rosana. I took this one, not on the day that I'm about to mention, but the most important day to remember, March 4th. March 4th, and again October 9th, the sun sets into the pyramid. They call this the planting of the sun. And we believe that perhaps the best seeds for planting on that day were selected by common people and carried up into the patio to be blessed by the priest before the planting season began. It's also the day, the first week of March, when they take the dark-skinned version of Jesus out of the main church in town and parade it about town with Indian dancers following. And this is what we call syncretism, the blending of 2 religions. The gods became the saints. The gods became the saints. The 4 cardinal directions, known as the 4 winds, familiar as the Christian cross. Ceremonies like what we see in San Miguel on certain days, even the beginning of May, the Feast of the Holy Cross, based on the time when the Southern Cross is visible at this latitude, is what we call syncretism. I'm going to talk much more detail about that. Syncretism, if you wanted to know how to spell it, there you go. Vivid pantheon of gods and goddesses manifested as the sun, moon, the planets, the constellations, and the forces of nature, reincarnated in their belief system as a ruling class. A religion based on ancestor worship. One of the first, oldest deities, Huehueteotl, is the old fire god, they call him. This comes from a site called Cuicuilco in Mexico City, and is really an anthropomorphic version of the Xitle volcano, which destroyed that city. Tlaloc, the rain god, you can see the origins of that. Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent, depicted by this cut conch shell, and many different aspects of these different deities. Duality, a common theme. Tezcatlipoca, deceit, sorcery, darkness, death, and the underworld on this side. Feathered serpent, the god of light, life, artistry, the wind, and knowledge on this side. Duality in the art, life and death, underworld and heavens, inside and out, male and female, night and day, sun and moon, and death was life. Without death, there is no life. and a lighthearted vision of death common in this part of the world, stemming from pre-Hispanic times. Mesoamerican ball game, played on a capital I-shaped court, slanted walls on each side, 2 stone rings on each side, dense rubber ball bounced off the hips, thighs, and elbows, and very dense, probably caused serious injury. Heavily padded people, probably more of a depiction of the movements of the sun and moon, or light versus dark. A casual version played, and a more formal version in which there was a beheading at the end. There's debate about whether that was the winner, or perhaps even, or the loser, or perhaps even the winner. A sacrificial victim in their belief system, and they always gave the best, the winner. They didn't want to sacrifice the inferior, but got to skip that underworld, rise into the realm of the deities. This is a theory, of course. We'd have to go back and ask some of these people directly some of these things we're talking about. Keep this in mind. Archaeology is like people sitting around a table trying to put together a puzzle with only some of the pieces, and in many cases, everyone arguing about what it should look like. Cranial deformation, physical alteration, dental alteration, tattooing, piercing, scarification, all elements of the elite classes in Mesoamerica. Elongated skulls, Mayan, Totonac, Veracruz mainly. Codices, bark paper screen full of books recorded in, well, religious, astronomical, calendrical, dynastic information recorded in these bark paper screen full of books we call a codex, the Codex Borgia, the Codex Dresden, the Codex Mendoza. All of these, almost all of them, burned by the Spanish, only a few left in existence, mostly in European archives and the Vatican. Long distance trade. This is a mosaic piece made from turquoise, shell, and red agate, I believe it is. A double-headed serpent on display at the museum in London. A lot of these European countries have many Mexican relics in their possession. The turquoise coming from as far away as New Mexico. We call it the Turquoise Trail, an intimate link between the American Southwest and Mesoamerica. Some of the pieces found in this area could be traced back to the actual mine that they came out of in New Mexico. There's that 2-headed serpent. Actually, the symbol I use on my website. Jadeite coming up from Guatemala. So extensive networks reach from Alaska down to the tip of South America. And one of the most fascinating aspects of sites in this area and Mesoamerican in general, the way the buildings emulate the surrounding landscape, incorporating the landscape and the sky into the architecture. This is a view from the Pyramid of the Moon at the end of the Avenue of the Dead at Teotihuacan, looking out to the Pyramid of the Sun. You can see its contours match the hill on the horizon beyond it. Amazing to me the way they did that. Here's Tzintzuntzan, Purepecha, Tarascan, Michoacan area. From this angle, you see the building emulates that hill on the horizon. The timelines. It gets really complicated because different people who make these timelines have different starting points, ending points, different regions overlap each other. It gets pretty confusing. Here's another one. Another one. This is a little bit more clear to us. Pre-classic, classic, post-classic, 3 time periods. Epi-classic is where sites in this area fall into. I'll be talking all about it. And to make it simple for you, pre-classic period, 1800 BC to about 150 AD. Classic period, 150 AD, 650 AD in the central area. The Maya classic period lasted a little bit longer, about 900 AD for reasons I'll be mentioning. And the post-classic period, 650, 900 to 1519, when Cortez showed up and crashed the party. Okay, pre-classic, formative period, indicative group that makes it so unique. The first advanced civilization in Mexico, the Olmec. Their heartland, the Gulf Coast area of Tabasco and Veracruz. San Lorenzo, earliest, La Venta, the Apogee, Tres Zapotes, late, many other sites in this area, but the Olmec branched out into other parts of Mexico. Here at Chalcatzingo is a place that we visit on a 7-day trip I do through central Mexico and down into the Mayan area, and most famous for their colossal stone heads. This is at the museum in Jalapa, Veracruz. These stone heads that weighed up to half a ton, made from basalt from the Tuxtla Mountains of Veracruz. Hard to believe they were even able to move them. Probably more riverine systems, water travel, perhaps a way of doing that. Show African, even Oriental features, possibly because the material itself was not malleable enough. Precise features hard to carve into that stone. Legends about African dark-skinned people migrating to this part of the world were common, but after genetic research, these people were definitely Mexican. And the helmets that they wear probably related to the different clans they represent, maybe the ball game, very mysterious. And their art, we have the emergence of a very specific feature related to the ruling class and the elite. And throughout Mesoamerica, they're known as the mother culture, though it's kind of wrong to say that because their culture and their art was copied by people all throughout Mesoamerica after this original mother culture, they call it, the were-jaguar. Some of the most common art in the Olmec area, flaming eyelids, almond eyes, downturned face, from which versions of the rain god emerged eventually, cleft head, from which the first maize of corn, stalk of corn arose from the mountain. That cranial deformation, by the way, a way of emulating a corn cob or the mountain, perhaps. I'm not going to get into the alien talk at this point. And the mating of the jaguar and the human. This is the feline representation of the ruling class. This is very common in Olmec art and followed through all the way up into, well, all the way through the history of Mesoamerica. This is Chalcatzingo, that place in Morelos that we take people to, one of the only Olmec sites in central Mexico. But you can see various images of some interpret as the attack, jaguar attacking, probably represents the elite people who are the Olmec and their conquest of local people. Here, a little bit more graphic representation of that crossing. Here is that jaguar face, were-jaguar emerging into images of the rain god in certain areas throughout Mesoamerica. Flaming eyelids, downturned mouth, almond eyes, were-jaguar representations throughout the Olmec area, mostly made of jade, greenstone, jadeite, and serpentine. And the cave and the Cruz de Andres, the cross of St. Andrew, refers to an apostle who was crucified, but you see that little cross here starts to emerge. The cave and the seated ruler consolidating his power inside the cave, controlling the clouds and the rain and smoke coming from the cave, and the cave mouth, a quadripartite vision of the universe broken into 4 rumbos or cardinal directions starts to emerge, and humans' origins coming from the cave common and their origin stories. And I really relate to this person inside the cave right now for reasons I know you all understand. Emerging from the cave, this is the throne. When you see these fangs descending and turning outward, the Cruz de Andres, the cross, and this up here, these cloud symbols represent the heavens, the cave, the underworld, and this ruler emerging from the cave. Here's the Cruz de Andres, the cross again. So when the Spanish came and held up the Christian cross, the native people knew what that was about, very familiar to them, helped with the conquest. They knew about the cross, bloodletting, sacrifice, Catholic elements blended together with indigenous elements. The crocodile, what they call sarios, or the crocodile, frog, iguana, lizard represent the surface of the earth. The crocodile's back, the mountains or the earth rising out of the ocean. This is the sarcophagus found, I believe it was at La Venta, yes. Matthew Sterling, the one who discovered the first colossal heads. When I say discovered, I mean rediscovered by a foreigner. Local people have always known about some of these things. And they just were, when people ask me when were these things discovered, I tell them what they mean to ask is rediscovered by foreigners and the government. Crocodile. Another important element in Olmec art, the hand/wing/claw. You'll see a lot of the artwork here. Now, here is the seated woman. They call this Señor de las Limas, with the baby, which turns out is probably more representation of corn, baby corn. You can see the jaguar face here representing the elite. And this piece in particular, well, before I talk about it, these are axe heads made of serpentine and other materials, carved into the shape of corn kernels, displaying corn, their most sacred domestic plant. Okay, and here you have the four ways, Andrew's cross, and the four cardinal directions of quadripartite vision of the world. Number 5, the center, above and below, is where they place themselves in the cosmos. And also, furthermore, represented in their architecture and art, acrobats. Now, these are probably priests and what look like yoga type positions to help them achieve a level of ecstasy or a level of consciousness, which help them tap in to the realm of the deceased and seek visions. Some of these psychotropic plants were so potent that the doses had to be very controlled so that the person did not die. These yoga type positionings may be a way of more safely attaining those higher levels of consciousness, which aided in their ceremony and helped them communicate with the deceased in the underworld and seek guidance in that way. Here you have the four-petaled flower, common at Teotihuacan and Toltec and Aztec art, which represents the four cardinal direction that goes back to the Cruz de Andres I mentioned, or originating in Olmec art. The four codex, the Madrid Codex, which is a Mayan codex in Madrid now, archives shows the four cardinal directions. The Codex Mendoza, which is Aztec, referring to the four cardinal directions. Each of these symbols in the four corners, the knees, back of this piece represent the different cardinal directions and the quadripartite vision of the universe. The crocodile, this is at a site called Izapa, which is a little bit after the Olmec, where you see the first representations of the sario, or the crocodile representing the earth, like the roots of the tree, the world tree, the stems reaching up into the heavens, and here we are in the realm of the living and on the earthly plane. The Señor de las Limas was found by two a boy and girl who found it and brought it to their little village. The people said, well, that must be Jesus in the arms of Mother Mary, and they made a little an offering to it, eventually taken to Texas for a while and brought back to Mexico. Not sure exactly where that is right now. Here's another vision of the world tree at Izapa and the crocodile here at the bottom. Olmec people conquering as they made their way through different parts of Mexico to promote their religion and their power as the elite political force in the pre-classic period. They call these the governors. This is was found at La Venta. Basalt pillars and a tomb, and you can see the cranial deformation. All these people seem to be facing a central figure who's probably considered the most elite or the ruler, a throne. And you see those images I told you before, which are like cloud or fang images coming from the top, represent the heavens. And these are two of the four, what the Maya would call pakwatun, or midgets, dwarves, who held up each corner of the universe. So they're holding up on this throne where the ruler would sit, as the ruler sits on the heavens there, that they hold up on each corner. And thrones, by the way, only found in the Olmec and Mayan area. Sarios, who's a crocodile at Izapa. And this one, the dwarf, Down syndrome, people who had these conditions were considered to have been sent by the gods, rarely accompanied the rulers in their courts. A ruler, perhaps rising out of the mouth of the crocodile. This, the heavens, the outturned fangs, the heavens, the inturned fangs, the maw of the earth monster, represented by the crocodile, and a ruler rising out of that into the heavens at Izapa. There's the frog. Wide hips, fertility goddess, Olmec, downturned face, almond eyes, cranial deformation, which leads us to other pre-classic sites. Now, what time is it? I've gotten off on a tangent here. Okay, now, this is the pre-classic. We're going to finish up the pre-classic in the next few minutes. We're going to leave it at that. And then when we pick up the next session, I'm going to talk about the classic period, the post-classic sites in this area. But before we do it, Cuicuilco, Tlatilco, circular pyramid at Cuicuilco, it's a pre-classic site. And Xitle volcano erupted around the turn of the millennium. This was covered with lava and mostly destroyed and now completely surrounded by Mexico City. These people fled the area when that eruption happened and eventually integrated into the Teotihuacan culture, the metropolis just outside of Mexico City that came to be the main ruling force in all of Mesoamerica during the Classic period. That's where the first images of Huehueteotl emerge. That is the anthropomorphic version of the volcano, deified, as you see, and Cuicuilco, the urn, is carried on the back and on the head here at Teotihuacan, and deified as the god of fire, the old god of fire. Acrobats at Tlatilco, again, very similar to Olmec, pre-classic. This is the museum in Mexico City, Museum of Anthropology. Wide hip, fertility goddess, cranial deformation, hole in the belly. And that leads us to pre-classic Guanajuato. What was happening in this area during the pre-classic? Well, I think this is going to blow your mind. This is what's happening in the pre-classic period around San Miguel. Chupicuaro, pre-classic art, ceramic, geometric patterns, well, mainly black, yellow, red, and you'll see these images of what seems to be actually the Peruvian cross in some of the art. Now, what they say that, and the wide hips, fertility goddess, pretty much every religion stems from a fertility goddess and the advent of the growing of crops and us relying on the earth to produce its bounty, and the worship of a fertility goddess depicted here in Chupicuaro art of the Guanajuato area. And a theory that has diapers on it, they say, or a new theory about this connection to Peru is this geometric art that you'll see, where you see these crosses. Get to one. These are the Peruvian cross. I mentioned that trade connection to Peru. This could have gone back that far. But very unique artwork in this area. Mostly women, fertility goddesses, or depictions of that. This is pre-classic Guanajuato and San Miguel. Now, I may have run, and there's your cross again. There's your pre-Hispanic crossed, equilateral. Extend this bottom portion, you've got the Christian cross right there. These little vessels here with the handle spout, definitely Peruvian looking to me. A lot of animal figures, conch shells painted. This is pre-classic Guanajuato. Now, before we get into the classic period, let's just go down. I just want to make a quick mention of what we're going to be talking about next time, which is this particular area. This is Teotihuacan, Guanajuato. El Coporo, Peralta, Cañada de la Virgen, and Plazuelas, which I'll be talking about more. Most information that I'll give will come from Cañada, but the most characteristic element of the architecture that makes sites unique in this part of Mexico, the sunken patio, attached to these pyramids in different configurations, and ceremonial spaces, timekeeping instruments aligned to the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, elite residence, staging area for tribute, observatory, sacred connection to the underworld, connecting the heavens and earth through ceremony, one of their main objectives. And this area of Mexico, most characteristic of it is the sunken patio. On that note, I guess I will go ahead, because we've gone over time. I could have gone on a lot longer, but I'll leave it there. And I guess we can open up the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, hi, Albert, this is Ginger. I'm gonna put Michael Friedman on. He had a couple of questions for you. So go ahead, Michael.
Hello?
Yes.
Hey, what is the connection, if any, culturally between the New Mexico tribes or whatever, Native Americans that may have been trading with the Mexicans in Turquoise? In other words, during their trading, were there other cultural connections that happened?
Yes, definitely. There is a unique connection. I had a man on my tour one day who's a Hopi man from New Mexico. I told him, I was telling the group that the large-scale climate shift that happened here around 1050 AD that caused these people to migrate south. And that's when the people in this area migrated south and vacated these sites. It was probably related to the large-scale climate shift that happened in the southwestern US that led to the disappearance of the Anasazi. And he said, what do you mean disappearance? I'm standing right here. He said, they didn't disappear. They migrated to other areas and became the Hopi in other groups. I said, maybe I should rephrase the way I say that. But he gave me the DVD he had made. He was a geophysicist, and he worked for NASA. And he filmed a documentary, The Mystery of Chaco Canyon. And these are the places, including the Kiva and whatnot, throughout the New Mexican area. He said, I want you to watch this DVD, and when you watch it, you'll notice some similarities. When I watched that movie, and you can probably find it on YouTube, it was narrated by Robert Redford. When I watched that movie, it was almost as if they had made it about Cañada de la Virgen. The alignments are similar. The kiva, the equivalent of the sunken patio, T-shaped windows that come from the Mayan area, corn, beans, and squash, burial practices, macaw and quetzal feathers went north, turquoise came south. And you have to keep in mind this too, all these people were genetically related to each other and had vast trade networks that connected them. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Great. Anything else?
Okay. We had a couple questions about potatoes.
Uh-huh.
And let me see what the
I
question
see one now that says, what years are pre-classic? Pre-classic is, in my opinion, 1800 BC to about 150 AD. I use BC and AD rather than BCE and CE. It just makes it easier for me to think that way, before Christ and after Christ. And go ahead.
We also have a question from Marilee.
Okay.
Marilee, are you there? Also, a question from, while we're waiting for oh, there you go, Marilee. Let's answer the question.
Okay.
For Marilee?
Yes.
Yeah. You haven't mentioned Pakime, which is, I understand, kind of a link between Mesoamerica and further north.
Yeah. Yes, we would call those the desert cultures, but definitely Mesoamerican elements. And an anomaly, a site so far in the northern desert areas that hard to believe it was Mesoamerican, but it's a very mysterious site. I have not been to it myself. I will have to check it out one day, but I would call that a mixture of what we call desert cultures and Mesoamerican for sure.
Yeah.
A definite link to the American Southwest and northern Mexico. Casas Grandes.
We have another question from Zelly. She says that several people reported feeling earthquakes recently here in San Miguel. You mentioned there hasn't been any volcanic activity, but is there any theory that the land may reawaken, or are earthquakes common?
No. This part of the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Axis, and there is a fault line that goes right through here, but it's been inactive for a long time. The last time it erupted was about 10 million years ago. But it is the reason for all the dark, fertile soil, great for farming, several types of volcanic stone, used to build pyramids, colonial buildings, modern buildings today, and black obsidian. I mentioned the importance of that. This part of that volcanic zone has been dormant for a long time. But we sometimes feel a tremor when there's a big event happening further south around Mexico City or to the west of us in places like Colima. And does that answer your question? Anything else?
There was going back to this question about potatoes. Those questions, why aren't there varieties of potatoes here?
Oh, there are several different varieties in ancient times, many more. It has to do with commercialism. It has to do with marketing and whatnot, and the cost it takes to grow certain crops and export them. But there were many different varieties, more varieties in Peru though, South America. South America was much more the potato producing area, like a rainbow of colors. And the same thing with corn. Blue, white, red, many different native varieties here. This is where it originated, and down in Peru, that's where the potato was more important.
Okay, thank you, Albert. Then the last question I have on the questions is, what if any cultural connections were established between the Native Americans in New Mexico and Mexicans resulting from their trade in turquoise.
Oh yeah, I just answered that.
You did, okay. And I don't see, are there any more questions that anybody would like to type into the chat? Okay, that's all with the questions, Albert.
All right, great. So is that where we'll end it?
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening to me. And I will hopefully not see y'all, but have y'all here attending next week, Thursday at 5 o'clock for session 2. And that will be much more focused on San Miguel and the surrounding area. And I will actually, hopefully Rosanna can help me with that one a little bit too. But looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice job, Albert. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
There was just one comment to make your laser wand bigger in your point, and
Okay.
if that's a possibility, but I think it was really informative. We had a total of, I think there was, we say about 50 people on, 40, yeah, between 47 and 51 people were on. And I think there was over 70 people registered. So I think it's successful.
So one of the panelists just mentioned that we are online now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let's see, if I end it, we might end it for all of you. But what I was saying,
That's fine.
you know, it's not a private thing. I think you did a great job, and thank you. And we're excited to see you next week, same time. Just to people who are still online, your registration for this webinar applies to next week's webinar as well. So you don't have to register twice. There's a link in the chat for where you can make your donation if you haven't done so already. And we're excited for our next, we have a couple more webinars scheduled. We just confirmed for a Mexican wine course. And we're gonna have hopefully more from the Mask Museum and some local artists and just local cooking classes perhaps. We're making connections with the people who make the mojigangas. So just all sorts of exciting things about what makes San Miguel special during this time that people can't experience. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.